Brother Benz is, I think, the best of deconstructing the interlocking nature of the intelligence community, the tech community, the media community, law enforcement, all of it, and particularly what emanates from the imperial capital. Mike Benz, this fight is one of the more important fights in the transition for the fledgling Trump second term, is it not, sir?
It absolutely is. This is an existential fight. This is the relationship between the Justice Department and the FBI is the same relationship that's shared between the U.S. State Department and the CIA. They need to be constantly in sync. You need two brains that understand each other. You can't really have a compromise candidate where one person supports the president and the other person is looking to put a knife in the president's back. That is simply untenable when you're dealing with the kind of special compartmentalized operations that happen at the FBI level. It's simply too dangerous to put someone in there who is going to try to hide things from a Justice Department that is not on the same page agenda-wise.
So Rogers is a former agent, correct? Just ran for the U.S. congressman, talk show host, ran for the Senate up in Michigan, barely lost. What's your beef? Why does the MAGA right, and particularly the ultra MAGA, or as Elon Musk say, the dark MAGA element of that understands and every day is in a fight with the deep state, why are we particularly upset about a guy like Mike Rogers, who in normal times would be looked at as a fine, center-right candidate put up by a Romney-type Republican administration, sir?
Well, I have one issue first and foremost, which is free speech on the internet. And Mike Rogers is the former head of the Intelligence Committee, overseeing the CIA while Russiagate was happening, basically greenlighting all of the Russiagate predicates that turned out to be complete BS. Mike Rogers, who is on the board of directors of the Atlantic Council, which is probably the number one apex predator in the entire censorship industry. The Atlantic Council was holding censorship training meetings for hundreds of journalists around the world. This is at the top of my X feed right now. It's at Mike Ben Cyber. You can watch a 45-minute video where Mike Rogers' Atlantic Council was literally holding up on a jumbotron slide decks of Trump tweets and how you could report them for disinformation. This whole thing was set up initially under the predicate that Trump's win in 2016 was illegitimate because of Russian interference on social media. Mike Rogers, using his CIA connections there, was part of the IRI's Beacon Project. The IRI is the CIA wing of the GOP that is married since birth to John McCain, George Bush, Dick Cheney, Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's currently on the board of it. Mike Rogers is currently affiliated with the IRI's Beacon Project. It was started by John McCain. The Beacon Project was a GOP CIA snake operation to censor social media because Trump won using social media. They started something called the Beacon Project, which basically sought to be a real-time disinformation dashboard, sort of like a beacon scanning light out into the internet in order to detect false narratives circulating online, in particular those that supported Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was assessed by the intelligence community under Mike Rogers' watch as being a potential Russian asset. IRI has then gone on to promote censorship laws around the world. IRI played a major role in the construction of a censorship industry in Brazil because it's technically folded out of a CIA cutout called the National Endowment for Democracy. It has this democracy promotion work. It's fully funded by the State Department. IRI teamed up with Hunter Biden's NDI in order to construct a censorship apparatus within Brazil, touching their judges, touching their universities, touching their largest circulation newspapers, in order to get anti-misinformation laws passed, to censor social media, to censor encrypted chat. They basically swallowed the internet whole. They promote the EU Digital Services Act, which is pushing for a 6% global revenue fine on X because Elon Musk is not censoring Trump enough. They are going around the world, 140 countries, to try to encircle populism worldwide to get it back into the Coke and Pepsi choice between a Hillary Clinton or a Mitt Romney type president, and Mike Rogers is at the center of that.
And so how does a guy like Rogers, because this has been very well documented, and for people that are part of, in the tip of the spear of this revolution, Mike, your work, which is fundamental to both seizing the institutions and forcing change, how can we be in a situation? I mean, when they told me Mike Rogers was shortlisted for the FBI director, I actually thought it was a joke. I thought it was a parody. And people did say, hey, he ran a good campaign in Michigan. That was a tough race. There weren't a lot of great candidates in the primary. And, he did as good as he could, got a lot of support from the big donor class. But that's very different than being director of the FBI, particularly at Gates and this incredible crew over justice. And there's so much we have to do to basically purge the American Gestapo. How are we in a situation where you have Kash Patel on one hand, who is just fantastic in every level, and you got Mike Rogers on the other? How do we get in this situation?
I can't really peer through the fog of war on that. My sense is that there are donor considerations and there are negotiations in progress with the Republican wing of both the House and the Senate, because in order to get the Trump agenda done, you're going to need that coalition. Otherwise, you will have peel-off of Republicans joining with Democrats to block every aspect of the Trump budget, every aspect of Trump appointments. And so there is this sort of deal with the devil aspect that I think the Trump inner circle is having to navigate. I think that there was political capital expenditure on putting in Matt Gaetz and Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth. By the way, I love all those picks. I look at the Marco Rubio pick and I think, okay, this was surely a conversation with
you love it. You love it a little less. Correct. Is the way to say it. We love it a little less.
Yeah, a little less. And but that is one of those situations where everything is going to run through state. State is the Mac Daddy over the CIA. State is where all this censorship came from in the first place. When you had a State Department that effectively betrayed the Trump administration 1.0 and did back-channel diplomacy with Europe to get censorship laws passed there, that did back-channel diplomacy with Brazil to get censorship laws passed there, that did back-channel diplomacy with the tech companies in order to have them end up snaking the sitting president of the United States. It's state who's got effective control over USAGM and the Open Technology Fund, over USAID, which is $50 billion worth of NGO firepower. It's state who back channels with the universities and the private sector companies, because they all depend on state to negotiate on their behalf in order to maintain their profits as multinational corporations or banks. And so you need someone rock solid in there, and we have Marco Rubio.
Benz, can you hang her for 1 second? Or a short commercial break, because I want to. This should be a teaching moment. I think it's very important for the War Room Posse and the cadres to fully understand. We've talked about it a lot over the last couple of years, but this is a live fire exercise where you're selecting a director of the FBI and what this means for this movement going forward, with the interconnections, and how Mike Benz and his great research and investigation can get you up to speed. Came from the first term of President Trump. Michael Benz in the War Room next.
Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, this is a very important teaching moment, particularly as we talk about the resistance. And we talk about the fight this movement has had, I don't know, for the last 10 years or so. When I posit that in this interregnum, or this period, they're not stopping. They're trying to jam. On media, they've been hit in the mouth, punch in the mouth, and they're kind of scrambling. The ratings are dropping. their foot soldiers don't want to watch anymore because they were lied and misled by these people. And if you go back and watch the election night coverage, you can really see how they were misled all the way up until the numbers started really coming in about 10:30. I right around the time North Carolina was called, you could see the people at Howard University and then in MSNBC, et cetera, start to realize the reality that Trump was going to win and win in a landslide, take all the battleground states, win the popular vote. It started to hit them. One of the things we're fighting for here, and I say that you can't stop because now in this period, we must start the process of seizing the institutions. This is a system that is corrupt and quite dangerous to its own citizens. We need to seize those institutions and purge and purify them and make sure that they're back to what the founders and the framers wanted, which was a limited government that provided just that government you need to kind of help or assist in organizations of things to promote the well-being, the general happiness, the liberty, and freedom of its citizens. Full stop. Conservatives have talked about this and written about this and had National Review and people President Reagan. And the Leviathan grew. The Leviathan grew. And now we're in a unique time in history. It's because of the coalition we've put together with, quite frankly, people who used to be kind of Democrats. You know, Robert F. Kennedy, Nicole Shanahan, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, David Sachs. We're putting together this kind of libertarian now populist billionaire, right? In the hard, right of the populist nationalist movement. And we don't agree on everything. In fact, there's a lot we disagree on. But that's okay because we agree on certain of the fundamentals. And one of those is the deconstruction of the administrative state. Both the libertarian populist billionaires and us on the right understand that this beast, this Leviathan, is so outside the concept of what the framers and the revolutionary generation thought of. And we have a couple of, I don't know if I call them Sherpas or Force Recon. Let's call them Marine Force Recon. The Ranger battalions. Just a handful of very smart, very dedicated, very tough individuals who, before the Trump administration, maybe been around the rim, but within the Trump administration have been students of this and see it, and they can report back. And our own Natalie Winters, at a very young age, is coming up to speed on that, and she's one of those. But one of the practitioners and one of the most impressive people in this is Mike Benz. After I left the White House, Mike Benz came over with Darren Beattie. I think Darren Beattie just left the White House, and Mike was on administration, and they walked through how we actually won in 2016 with the inadvertent help of big tech, who didn't quite understand what Cernovich and the Pepes and people were doing, but they were going to correct that. So Benz knows that intersection. They talk about intersectionality. We'll give you intersectionality of big tech and big media, in Wall Street, in the intelligence apparatus. Think about it. Tulsi's got 18 agencies that report to her with budgets, hundreds of billions of dollars and tens of thousands of practitioners. Mike Benz is someone that can take you through that. And so Mike Benz, the one thing I want for this cadre, for this audience, for the posse, is this has to be a teaching moment for you because very few people come to this. This is the true wilderness of mirrors. And remember, the key in intelligence is always the misdirection play. So, Benz, I want in this Kash Patel Rogers fight at the FBI to make sure that we get the posse totally up to speed with what's happening because, and here's the power of, and when I say seize the institutions, some of the institutions you're talking about, and I want to go back over it, were founded by people that were our forerunners in the anti-communist movement, the Jesse Helms and others, the Ronald Reagans. These things were set up to take on the Bolsheviks, to take on the global spread of communism. And it's been twisted. And twisted, and the guns have been turned on the populist nationalist movement. So, Benz, walk us through one more time. And I want to get people access. One thing I love about you put up tremendous content and you make it accessible. And I will tell the audience, This kind of stuff is addictive. Once you start understanding and how the pieces come together, you're going to sit there and go, wow, I now understand why Trump needs RFK. I now understand why Trump needs Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz and Kash Patel. Mike Benz, take it away, sir.
Yeah, and on that note, we were just talking about Mike Rogers at the top of my X feed. If people want to get educated, it's at Mike Ben Cyber. I have 5 post threads around the various networks that Mike Rogers has run his career through that are involved in all of this, from the Atlantic Council to the MITRE Corporation to the Harvard Belfer Center to the IRI. Steve, on your point about the origins of the persecution of populists coming from our diplomatic efforts to try to sway countries away from communism, that's exactly right. And in fact, these institution is such a watchword for the blob, for the State Department, the intelligence community, and the Pentagon. Institution has a sort of technical meaning there, and it means asset of the foreign policy establishment. So they will refer to their suite of so-called democratic institutions, which mean institutions that promote democracy within the region, institutions at the university level, institutions at the media level, institutions at the NGO level, or even at the for-profit level, or at the government level. And we have codified into our foreign policy establishment playbooks, into our intelligence community playbooks, even to our defense playbooks, this concept that populism is an attack on the institutions and therefore an attack on democracy. And so Ronald Reagan inherited a thorny problem in the early 1980s. The Church Committee hearings had just taken place in 1975 and 1976. They were hugely embarrassing to the Central Intelligence Agency, which at that point had 30 years without any oversight of the by Congress. In fact, my pinned tweet on my X account is a 40-minute lecture on the history of the intelligence state. You can watch that to get immediately up to speed. But that will take you through this evolution. So in 1975, 1976, these Church Committee hearings were holding up very embarrassing things for the CIA, like the heart attack gun, showing plausible deniability to induce a heart attack, so that it wouldn't look like a bullet wound, so that our spy agencies could assassinate people in the dark. It revealed things like Operation Chaos for the CIA to manipulate student newspapers on college campuses here in the U.S. It revealed things like Operation Mockingbird for global control of international media, Wisner's Wurlitzer, even things around, the famous MK Ultra. All these things were hugely embarrassing to the CIA, and Jimmy Carter rode to power in '76 on the back of these scandals around the Central Intelligence Agency, and went to war with them. He did the Halloween massacre, laying off 30% of the CIA in a single day, massively slashed its budget. So Ronald Reagan inherited this problem where he wanted a robust anti-communist capacity within the intelligence state, but could not get it past Congress, which was already, the Democrat Congress was already opposed to many of the foreign intervention actions of the Reagan administration. So they came up with a cute trick around something called the National Endowment for Democracy, which was that instead of having the CIA do it, they would have it be funded by the State Department. Instead of calling regime change or soft power influence operations a cloak and dagger spy capacity, they would call it a democracy promotion capacity. And so we effectively used that to win the Cold War. This is how we were able to flood so much money into Europe, around Poland and around Hungary and around peeling off Soviet satellite states, was because not everyone who participated had to have a national security clearance. We could onboard hundreds of institutions, hundreds of thousands, millions of people without it all being a cloak and dagger CIA shop. So NED was so celebrated as a CIA alternative. It was actually requested by Ronald Reagan's CIA director, William Casey, in 1983. That in 1997, David Ignatius in the Washington Post said, we don't even need to bother confirming a CIA director because the NED does all the effective things that the CIA used to do. Then Trump won in 2016. And suddenly it was not just Trump in the US, it was the Brexit movement in the UK, it was Matteo Salvini in Italy, it was Marine Le Pen in France, it was the Vox Party in Spain, it was the AfD Party in Germany, it was Bolsonaro in Brazil, it was Modi in India, it was Abe in Japan, and suddenly the entire rules-based international order, which had been completely controlled by the blob, by these rogue institutions for eight decades effectively, was now in the hands of the people. We actually had a true democracy for a brief moment in time. The response was to use our democracy promotion programs to shut down democracy by labeling the new threat to democracy not communism, not terrorism, but populism. And this has been codified into the intelligence agency playbooks. It's been codified into the State Department, in USAGM, and USAID, in DHS, and the National Science Foundation, and the FBI itself. They view, and not just view, they put in writing, they put on video, they put in their playbooks that populism must be stamped out in order to protect democracy. Well, we just elected a populist. So all of those programs have to go to donuts. They have to be X'd out entirely, or their existential existence has to be threatened with the stroke of a pen, as Kamala Harris once said.